Welcome to episode 33 of the Hail Mary podcast. I'm the Toves, and I'm joined by my podcast partner / wife, A Toves. We're excited to be back talking UTSA Roadrunner football together, and looking forward to so far what's been a much hyped season of UTSA football. Now, before we begin, we want to say thank you to our listeners. What started as something we'd only send out to our family and friends has become something we look forward to recording for any UTSA fan to listen to, and it's really cool to actually be able to connect with all of you via Twitter. Certainly quite a bit of UTSA podcasts out there, like Alamodome Audible, Birds Up, and Runners Unfiltered, to name a few. So, you know what? Soak them all in, as it's awesome to be part of this group creating content for UTSA fans. So let's get started.
Coming off of last year's conference championship win, UTSA certainly has a target on its back as it enters the 2022 season. Coach Traylor is using the mantra this year, the bull don't care, to remind the team that no one cares about what happened last year. 2022 is a fresh start. This is a really fun team, arguably maybe even more talented than last year's team. And as Traylor says, they're hard not to love. And so while we love them too, and it's probably going to sound a little nitpicky, we're going to walk through each of the position groups and kind of talk about some of the challenges and maybe some of those questions that need to be answered for this year. So let's start off with the offense. We'll walk our way through each of the position groups, from the ones that we feel most confident about to the ones that we have the most questions about.
Sounds good.
All right, so I think we start off with the wide receivers. This year they're calling themselves Zone 6, but they're really led by the trio of Franklin, Cephas, and Clark, with, the backups, Tyke, Chris Carpenter, Trayvon Bradley, Dre Spriggs. So let's talk about, really what they did last year and what we're looking from this group for this year.
I mean, that first big three had 226 receptions last season. They had 8 drops. 4 of them from Zakari, 2 each from JT and Josh. I mean, if you think about just how many receptions they had, that's just incredible, right? But even then, the receivers overall dropped, 18 passes were dropped last season. 17 of those came from the wide receiver group. That's still, quite a ratio.
Very low percentage, considering how much Frank was throwing last season.
Absolutely. And I think that, it just shows just how steady this group is. They are explosive, but the fact that they're so consistent, that's why we have the least amount of questions with them. Yes, if something happens to Zakari, to JT, or to Josh, there are going to be some questions of, can Tyke, can Chris Carpenter, can Trayvon Bradley step in and fill some of that. But I feel confident in that they're going to not only make plays when they get the balls in their hand, but they're also going to help in the run blocking. So honestly, do you have any questions?
No, I think if you look at those first three, Franklin, Cephas, Clark, they are arguably the best trio in G5, hands down.
Yeah, I completely agree. If anything, I guess the one question is just, again, nitpicky, is can you maintain or decrease those drops that you had from last season? That's going to get tricky, though, because we are transitioning, I think, to a much more pass-oriented offense than was previously because of Sincere's departure. So this should get a little more interesting. So that's why I think we should head into another group which has, I think, the least amount of questions, the tight ends. And the reason we're highlighting this group so early is because we are transitioning, and I say we, but it's UTSA, is transitioning from 12 personnel to 11 personnel. Anybody that doesn't understand what that means, just real quick, it's 12 personnel is 1 running back and 2 tight ends. So last season we had Sincere and Leroy and Oscar. Now it's going to be running back to be named and then Oscar. There's not going to be a second tight end. And even when another tight end does come in, they're probably going to go in the slot. So we're not going to see those double tight end sets like we saw before, those heavy ones. Will Stein runs more of a true spread offense. So this is going to get a little interesting in terms of the evolution, I think, of what I think where Traylor was heading towards anyway. He likes tight ends, but he's certainly is transitioning away from sort of a heavier set one like Oscar and Leroy to more of an athletic one where you see in Dan Dishman and some of these other new ones.
Right. So that takes us to the quarterback position. No question at starting quarterback. This year we know it's Frank Harris. You know, it's been a long time since we've had 0 questions for the starter. And
but we do have a question though.
Yes.
He did have surgery in the off season, so no longer is he squinting. So
yeah, he had LASIK surgery. Don't panic anyone. He had LASIK surgery. So from all accounts, he can see better. And you know, I know there was kind of some joking in some of the post practice press conferences, but you know, JT and Cephas and Franklin, they all said that Frank's sight is quite improved, and so hopefully we're going to see that with maybe some tighter passes.
Quicker reads, I think.
Yeah.
And then, you know, hopefully some of these other issues in terms of, you know, seeing the field might be improved because of it. So, you know, I think Stein's probably going to kind of, again, this is where I think the evolution to more of an 11 personnel, more of a true spread is going to get interesting because you now have a quarterback that can see, maybe see the play calls as well.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. But I think we have a bigger question that I think you want to ask.
Yeah. What about QB2? You know, when you look at the backups, we have Eddie Lee, Cam Peters, and then really those are the two. You know, you have your freshmen with Teo and Murray, but who do you think is going to be QB2?
I think it's Eddie Lee. I would find it hard to see that it's Cam Peters. Look, you know, I think Cam has not been in the picture up until this season where, you know, honestly, I think they felt like that he needed to step up anyway. That said, I think that at least with Cam, has he made enough strides to really make us feel comfortable in, you know, QB2? You know, it's a guy that hasn't gotten any FBS snaps. You know, I think the last snaps he really took game-wise outside of scrimmages within UTSA are probably from his senior year of high school.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I guess the question really there is Traylor truly comfortable with Cam Peters? If it comes down to the fact that Eddie Lee can't go, or, you know, we have issues with Frank as well. So, you know, if those two guys have problems, like, you know, are we going to feel okay with Cam Peters? That said, over the summer, we noticed that Eddie Lee had actually a walking boot. I think that after looking at it and, you know, wondering what kind of injury it was, you know, obviously on his leg, do you think that he's fully recovered from that injury?
Well, I'm wondering if maybe some of the reason why we're hearing more about Cam Peters and his progression is not necessarily just because he's improved, but perhaps because Eddie Lee is suffering, you know, or still, I shouldn't say suffering. Eddie Lee is still recovering from, you know, whatever this injury was that he had over the summer. And perhaps, you know, with an injury on his foot, perhaps that's throwing off some of his timing when he throws. And maybe he's just not 100%. And so the gap between Eddie Lee and Cam has narrowed a little bit because Eddie Lee is perhaps not, you know, at 100% right now.
And to that, though, you would imagine that if that gap is closed or closed more,
Yeah.
the gap between Eddie Lee and Frank has probably widened some.
Sure.
So certainly you can see the effects here, and you start kind of wondering, like, can we keep Frank, you know, healthy? Because, you know, I had said last season at the very end was his best abilities is availability, and, you know, it was like he was able to stay healthy, play all the games, and when he did, because he did, we had consistency at quarterback. You get consistency at quarterback, you see that the offense flows much better. That the
Right.
team is much more confident going out into the field because they know exactly who's going to be taking the snaps. Let's jump to the offensive line then, because I think that's the next group that probably has some questions. You know, I look back at this group and I've seen just pretty much had the same starters for the last couple of years. You know, Burford's gone on to the NFL, but we've also seen this group kind of suffer because of, you know, injuries. Obviously, the chemistry kind of falls apart when you have injuries because you have different people coming in to, you know, take the place from the normal starters. So let me ask you this. We know that this offensive line, I think, at least in UTSA fans' eyes, is seen as, I think, great. Where would you feel like it truly ranks in terms of G5?
Because we just haven't had consistency in terms of the amount of injuries, I think it's hard to say that this is a really great O-line because we haven't seen what they can do game in and game out when they're healthy. So I would say they're probably good, maybe better than average, but it's hard to judge them because we just haven't seen all of them playing every single game together. That said, we obviously know we're going to have one new position, with left tackle, either going to be Tatafu or Meach. Meach was here before. Has some play time. Venley's new. But again, I think until we see more consistency from them, it's hard to say that they're really a great line.
And I'd agree with that. I think that they've had some great moments.
Sure.
And I think that we've just attributed this group to those great moments instead of really looking, I think holistically, that's a great word to put it. And, to be able to say, like, this is a good group, but it's certainly not great. That said, I think that at least another question that needs to be answered is snapping. Maka has had some issues. Just to remind everyone, Memphis was one game that really stood out to me where he had a lot of issues. Had some issues, in the UAB game. The final play, the game-winning play, the snap is on the ground to Frank. Frank, I think, has dealt with these snaps for so long that I think he now reacts to it, or at least is able to react when he sees that ball coming. And, honestly, I think, he has an idea of what it's going to look like when it's coming towards him. Whether it's going to be right on his hands or he's going to have to, make a quick jump or, again, make some sort of other adjustment. Yeah. So, I just think that if you can get your shotgun offense, you shouldn't be having this many issues, especially since it's not like Maka has, just started last season. He was a starter back in 2019. So this is just something, whether maybe it's injuries again, but, it's something that I think he needs to correct. Even further, any of the backups that come in for Maka need to, have to be at a higher level in terms of snapping. This is an issue, and, it could be something that really throws off the timing of this offense. With the change in Will Stein, we don't know how that timing could be thrown off, and, it's something that you don't want to be dealing with against some of the better teams.
Right. So that takes us to running back, which, again, going into fall practice, running back was really the position that everyone had questions about. We knew that Brendan Brady was coming back, which obviously gave everybody a bit of a sigh of relief. We have the transfer in Edwards, and then, of course, we signed Traylon Smith. But injuries has plagued this running back room, and so what seemed like was going to be a potentially deep room at one point became very thin very quick. So what are your thoughts on running back now that we know we have Traylon Smith, very talented guy coming in from Arkansas, Brendan Brady back, who we all know, and we know his consistency, and then Ty Edwards, the JUCO transfer.
So I think that's a good top three right there. From what I've seen, I got to go out to one of the UTSA practices, and I saw Ty Edwards, and I think the first thing I told you when I came back was that is a large but fleet-footed man, and that's not a guy that for one, I'm sort of a smaller guy, so, but I'm still not a guy that I would be wanting to try to tackle, because he certainly is going to run over some guys. However, the question, I think, is pass blocking. It's something that I had brought up when we kind of reviewed the spring game, and it's still something that I think in this new Will Stein offense, because we've transitioning to an 11 personnel, that means that the running backs are going to have much more responsibility in terms of pass blocking. So how does that look like? And if it's to go even further than that, if it's not successful by the running backs, do you see sort of return to 12 personnel where we have to bring in an extra tight end into the game and start giving, you could be given a different look, but still, it's not something that you want to have to revert to, especially, because it really signals that there are more issues than you really want to admit. So, just something to think about. I think a lot of people thought that you could just kind of plug in a lot of players here, but I think that there's a chemistry, much like offensive line, where you need to know where these guys are going to, or where Frank is going to move around the pocket, where he's, where the blitzers are coming from. I mean, it's just not something I think you can just pick up overnight. So, but that said, I think that they have worked on this and they've probably been trying to get this kind of knocked down. But I'll go back to what you said. We know exactly what Brendan Brady can do. It makes you feel a little better than you did when we went to the spring game with essentially new guys to the position. We had a walk-on that was the third stringer. So not to say that Justin Rodriguez probably can't do the job. It's just that's not where you want to put yourself in terms of depth.
Right. The other question is Traylor has mentioned instead of having that workhorse running back, going to more of a running back by committee. How do you feel about that, and what do you think that's going to look like this year for the Roadrunners?
I think it gets interesting because then what you're looking at is you get a little more flexibility, and I think that going into this 11 personnel, it gives different looks to the defense. Probably going to see more catches by the running backs. I think you're going to want to see Frank kind of unload the ball a little quicker, so maybe there is just going to be some running back flares. But I think a question that then arises from having like a running back from committee is ball security. Mm-hmm. Sincere was a workhorse, but Sincere also didn't fumble. And I get that he probably did have some fumbles, so we know that. But what I mean is...
rarely did he fumble.
Much like the wide receivers and their drops, it's a rare occurrence. Now we have new ball handlers. Are they going to be able to secure the ball? Are they going to do it consistently? Some of the things that made UTSA successful last season were the fact that they weren't turning the ball over. So if this becomes an issue, how does Traylor respond? Are we... Again, you said there wasn't a ton of depth. I mean, there's depth, but there's not a ton. So if you start seeing sort of this issue from ball security from the running backs, I think it brings up a lot of red flags. And we're playing some tough teams first 3 out-of-conference games. So I think we'll begin to see the answer in the first 3 games. And hopefully it's not a bad answer. But also, again, I really want to highlight the importance of Frank Harris. The fact that he is there and he returns is big for an offense that not only is transitioning, but needs consistency at quarterback. So I think we're going to be in a good spot overall with offense. I know there's a lot of tough questions, but, I think let's cross our fingers with this.
All right, let's move on to the defense. The defense has less starters returning. We have 5 starters coming back on defense. So let's walk through each of those position groups. You have the D-line as being the position group you feel most comfortable with going into that first game.
This is sort of odd because the running backs were the ones that we had the most questions on in the spring. Defensive line, we didn't know. We knew we had talent. Mm-hmm. We knew we got a couple transfers. But we then kind of added a couple of players in here. So because of that, it went from, and I think it was Javi from Birds Up that said it went from essentially redo the line to we just reloaded. That's all that happened, and that was a great way of putting it because I think it reinvigorated me in terms of looking at the defense and saying, hey, maybe the biggest question here is health. Sure, there's plenty of depth on this line, but as long as they stay healthy, this is going to be a pretty stout line. And even though they don't have a lot of, I think, production from previous seasons, I think the talent's just going to show on the field. So
why don't you talk about who some of those guys are that we think are going to be starting on the D-line?
We believe that Joe Evans is going to be there. He's a LSU transfer. Brandon Brown is going to play nose tackle. And then the other defensive end should be Cyrus Simon. Again, I think I'm saying his name correctly, but I think to me this group, just that starting group, is terrific for Conference USA alone. Going up against the 3 tough out-of-conference teams, they're still going to be, I would say, pretty good. I mean, I think they're going to be able to handle some of these offensive lines. Then you have a Lamont McDougal, Tremaine Bell, a Brandon Matterson, a triplet, a Christian Clayton coming off the bench. I mean, some of these guys, in, I would say, years past would have been starters. I mean, they would have been no-brainer starters, but now they're on the bench because, again, you see the depth that's come in for the defensive line. So certainly encouraging. Again, it was a reload. So I look forward to seeing what this D-line is going to do throughout the season.
Another position kind of along the same lines, going into the spring, we had lots of questions at cornerback with, the departure of Tariq Woolen to the NFL. But you have this as kind of the second position where you have a little bit more questions in D-line, but you certainly feel much better about, where we've reloaded in terms of the transfers that we've brought in.
Well, I think it's kind of a tie. I think it's just the secondary overall, cornerbacks and safeties. You have Corey Mayfield returning. You have DeJuan Griffin, who's didn't see a lot of time, but has certainly looked like he's made a jump from last season to this season. You brought in a 3-year starter in Nick Troy Fortune. You got a freshman in Zay Frazier. And then you still have Xavier Spencer in there to kind of round out some of the cornerbacks. It may not sound as stout, but there's a lot of good depth here. And because of it, I think Traylor's kind of mentioned it too, where with cornerbacks, you don't want to have to be shuffling these guys in and out too much. Really throws off their rhythm. These guys, I mean, I would say Mayfield and Griffin are probably going to start, but Fortune, I think, is going to be it's going to play more like the Manu, I think, where he's going to come off the bench and he's going to be the one that kind of closes out games. But even then, having the availability of DeJuan Griffin is going to be huge. So, to me, I think that this group has kind of stepped up. I think that they have made the passers, the quarterbacks, better because of it. Because we were watching some of the videos, and Frank Harris was making some throws that he hadn't before. Could be the vision. But to be honest with you, it looked like the cornerbacks were forcing Frank to put it in the best spot possible. And you kind of saw that from some of the other quarterbacks too, where they had some completions, but the quarterbacks were in great positions. So, I mean, it certainly made me feel much more comfortable about where this position group is after the loss of Tariq Woolen.
And clearly, Traylor was feeling pretty good about that position group because he was willing to move Ken Robinson, who has been a quarterback for UTSA, over to the safety position, because clearly he feels like he has enough depth at cornerback.
Yeah, and Ken could probably just go back and forth between the two if one of them starts, getting hit by the injury bug. I think at safety, the bigger question is, can Clifford Chapman stay healthy? He has not been able to. If he goes down, and the problem is he hasn't just gone down. He's been out for seasons. So, you want to see him get a full season in. But it certainly hurts the depth if he's, and I won't just say Clifford, but he's the most obvious candidate here. But any of these guys go down, and it certainly starts punching into your depth, and it starts kind of giving you more questions. So I still think, you've got a Kalechi coming off the bench, a Pig Cage, who's a new transfer, a Javon DeBon, who's actually, I think that's his first name. But, yeah. They've certainly kind of popped during camp as their names have been brought up. So, when Traylor brings up their names, it's not just a little thing. He has seen something. His position coaches have seen something. So, I think the safeties, while I think you have them ranked more 3 and having more questions, I think it's really, again, based on health. Can these guys stay healthy? And I think this group improves from previous seasons.
So that leads us into the linebacker position where you have the most questions. Obviously, the biggest question when it comes to linebackers is who's going to start on the outside and replace Charles Wiley and Clarence Hicks.
And I think the two of us have been going back and talking about this over and over. How do we make up for Clarence Hicks' production? Because that's really the big piece of this. He had so many sacks last season and had so much pressure that it felt like he was in the backfield just about every single play. So who steps up and does this? And I think the question will start to be answered when we figure out who's actually going to be starting there. but we did see that Jamal Ligon spent some time with the outside linebacker. So it means that the middle linebackers seem to probably be in a better position because of the fact that you can move one of your middle linebackers to the outside to provide some more depth. I'm not as worried as about the middle linebackers. I think, you've got like Drew Prox.
And Harmonson.
You got Harmonson in there. They haven't really mentioned this, but, Caden Holt, I think, is a talented player, but I think he's being kept on the bench because of Drew Prox. I think because of Avery Morris, I'm sorry, and, a couple of the other players. So it gets really interesting to see, where these guys are going to head to. Now, when we've talked about, how we're going to replace Clarence Hicks, there's sort of some interesting things that have come out from Traylor. I was wondering if you wanted to kind of talk about that.
Yeah, he's been asked a couple of times in press conferences, and clearly he doesn't want to, really put his cards on the table so that the competitors know exactly what he wants to do. But when we were listening to Kelechi at the media over the weekend, clearly they have some different schemes, some different looks that they're looking at using to replace Clarence and Charles Wiley that, may involve blitzing from the safeties versus just using the linebackers. So it'll be interesting to see, what they ultimately do. But, I guess don't be surprised if you see Rashad in the backfield a lot more, or, Rashad rushing the quarterback a lot more than you would have seen maybe last year.
And I think that also speaks to the cornerback depth and some of the other stuff going on in the safeties. I think just overall this, much like the offense, there's depth here. There's flexibility in terms of just what the talents are for many of these players. So, it's good to see this amount of talent on offense and defense. Obviously you don't want any of your position groups to start going through any sort of injury bugs. I guess for me, when it comes to Conference USA, outside of some of these like big time passing offenses, who knows how Western Kentucky does? Who knows how how Middle Tennessee, who's now going into an air raid type, who knows how they do? And I don't think they're going to be as prolific as Western Kentucky was last season. So I just feel like the defense is going to be all right. It's just getting through those first three out of conference games that is going to be the biggest hurdle for this season.
Let's talk a little bit about special teams. Obviously, replacing Hunter Duplessis is going to be a challenge. He's very, very consistent at his field goal percentage, but we see the return of Jared Sackett. If we go back and we look at what Jared Sackett did when he was here as a freshman and a sophomore, overall, I think UTSA fans should feel pretty good about what Jared is hopefully, or what Jared should be able to do in replacing Hunter. He's not going to be exactly what we saw in Hunter last year, but it's kind of interesting to see Jarrett replacing his own replacement.
That's a great way of putting it, because that's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
Which is, how many teams ever say that?
Yeah, it probably doesn't come up hardly. It might come up now with the transfer portal, but hardly at all.
True. Very good point. I think we're going to get a bigger leg, so we might see longer field goals. But I think because of the longer field goals, you might see a decrease in accuracy. That is something that Jared had some problems with his sophomore year. He was being asked to kick some longer field goals, and because of that, you're much like long passes, your accuracy goes down. That's just the way things work here. So I think if Jared is focused and just listens to the coaching and stays confident, I don't see that there's going to be as big a drop off. He's a solid kicker. He really is. So I don't anticipate many issues here, as well as we haven't talked about punter, but do we really need to really focus on Lucas Dean?
No.
That is the most solid guy.
Yep, absolutely. I think the only other question we have on special teams we really can't answer right now, and that's who will be doing the punt returning, and then who will be kickoff return opposite of Dadrian Taylor.
Yeah.
And we're likely not going to know that until the first game or until the depth chart comes out, I guess, next week.
Official one, yeah.
Yeah, since Traylor really hasn't, he's been very coy when it's come to those questions. So speaking of Traylor, let's get into some of the coaching. and talk about Traylor a little bit. I know you wanted to talk about some of his culture that he's developed and how he's continuing things this year.
Yeah, so first I want to start it off actually with his keen eye for talent. I mean, we've talked about the depth on both sides of the ball. He's incredibly strategic on which position groups he's looking for and what he's looking for at each group. I think you're starting to see just the transition from the type of players he wants at every single position. We kind of talked about it and alluded to it in the tight end group where you see going away from big tight ends, more like offensive linemen playing tight ends to, I say, sleeker guys that are, smaller, a little quicker, guys that can probably make more plays when they get the ball in their hands. And you're seeing the defense, again, what he values, which is defensive line. He wants a ton of depth there. He wants to be able to rotate guys in and out to keep them fresh. So, yeah, let's talk about the culture, because there have been times where he's questioned himself on certain things that are going on, like the single digits. Should he continue that? There's been other times where he has looked at the culture and wondered if that's the right move for his teams. I thought it was a great story from Joe Evans over the weekend from the media day in terms of why he came over to UTSA. He was being recruited by Houston. He said he was kind of leaning towards Houston. And then he talked to Pig Cage, who was one of his teammates at LSU. And Pig told him, hey, this is a different place. You can actually give feedback to essentially your leaders. And they're not only will they listen, they welcome that feedback. And I think it really spoke to, our professional lives. That's what we look for in companies, right? We want to work for leaders that are going to listen to us and that welcome that feedback so that, we can all become better, right? Mm-hmm. It sounds easier than it is, but, those are things that attract employees. It also attracts players. Like, there's a lot of guys that are really enjoying this culture that Traylor has set. But another key part of the story that Joe Evans said in his recruitment was the fact that Traylor was not on campus. He was actually on vacation, and that it was Dr. Campos and Dr. Amy that were the ones that, essentially escorted him during his visit. I mean, how many times does your boss, essentially tell you, hey, go on vacation. I got this. I'll go take care of all this for you. Mm-hmm. It's very rare, but I think it shows just the type of culture that has been set not only at UTSA but also into the UTSA football program. And that's contagious, and people want to work for those kind of, again, those leaders, and also come to play for those leaders. And that Joe Evans story was actually, I thought, really good and insightful into knowing at least a little bit into Traylor. As much as, he talks about culture and he talks about some of these pieces, I like the fact that, he still talks about the triangle of toughness, the culture pillars, because I think when he gets himself and questions himself, and he needs to just lean into his culture. His players love him. They love what he's built here, and he just needs to continue to just make sure that he keeps that culture in place.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to hear, really, when you listen to the interviews of the athletes, to hear them talk about the culture and the impact, and really talk about Traylor and all of the coaches, and that they really are people of integrity, and they're people that mirror what it is that they're telling the media. So it's not just coach talk,
right,
or coach speak,
right,
as Traylor says. So kind of piggybacking on the coaching piece, one of the things we really haven't talked about, and even when you read articles about UTSA and about the season, you don't hear a lot about, is the fact that we lost 3 coordinators over the offseason. Barry Lenny's gone, our Rod Wright's gone, so one of the co-defensive coordinators, and then we lost our special teams coordinator.
Tommy Perry.
So are we just sort of glossing over and just, kind of looking at the fact that Traylor's here, everything's great, we were able to retain him, and just glossing over the fact that we've lost these key coordinator positions? Or because we've had internal promotions, do you feel like you're not going to see a dramatic change or a drop off in those coordinator spots this year?
That's a fantastic question, because I think that we're going to find that out as the season goes on, obviously. But, going back to the culture that we talked about, he holds that for his coaches as well. And I think that, the fact that he's been able to, I think, grow some of these young assistants, there's going to be less questions. I think the biggest question for Will Stein is just going to be, how does he handle adversity when his game plan, starts falling apart. We saw what happened with Barry Lunny. He was steady, made sure to keep Frank sort of in a rhythm, and you could tell that there was just this connection between him and his quarterbacks. So it'll be interesting just to see from Will Stein, how does he handle those things. I have bigger questions on defense because I think that Rod Wright was more of a steadying influence in terms of the play calling, in terms of how the defense responded. And I don't know how Lep is going to handle adversity. Certainly he's faced it, in, all of last season, and then the last few games that he was defensive coordinator in 2020. Do we have enough coaches that are going to get in his ear and to be able to, steady him or give him enough, good feedback to, for him to make the right adjustments? I don't know. I have a big question as how Lep is going to respond with the loss of Rod Wright. Do you think that it's going to be any different, or am I just being too negative here?
I don't know. Obviously, the last time we saw Lep on his own was at the end of 2020. There were certainly some questions there in terms of how quick play calls were getting out. But, now that he's had a whole year under his belt, maybe those things have improved. But it certainly is going to be interesting because there was such positive feedback about Rod Wright. So, we'll really get to see, when you pull the onion back, what does it look like with just Lep on his own?
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. So let's go on to the single digits, because they did come out yesterday. We had a chance to actually look over, where some of these guys came out and who actually made the single digits. How about you give us a little recap on what happened?
Yeah, so first thing, everybody who got a single digit last year, who's still on the team, retained their single digit. The new additions this year were J.T. Clark, Corey Mayfield, Brandon Matterson, Clifford Chapman, Lucas Dean, Kalechi, Brandon Brown, and Oscar Cardenas. Trevor Harmonson, the last 2 years, has been voted into a single digit, but has elected to keep his number 15. This year, though, he decided to go ahead and accept his single digit. So you'll see Harmonson wearing a 1 this year instead of 15. And then, of course, the offensive line can get voted into the single digits, but they can't wear them because of their position. So the two that received single digits this year that didn't get them last year were Terrell Haynes and Kevin Davis. Both Maka and Mekhi Hart were voted into single digits last year and were voted in again this year. But again, you're not going to see them wearing the single digit.
Right.
So overall, no huge surprises. A lot of these names of the guys that got voted in this year were people that we heard about at post-practice conferences as people who are stepped up for leaders. But definitely very excited to see some of these seniors and super seniors who are with the team this year, get voted into a single digit. Some of the guys like Kalechi, we'll talk about in a little bit, definitely wanted to work hard to get that number. So good to see them, have that pay off for them.
I would just add this. It's clear that this team does not lack leadership when it comes to players and coaches. And, that's why some of these seasons matter so much, because you want to take advantage of the fact that you have, such great players and such great coaches, together on one team. And I think Traylor does a very good job of maximizing just every experience with these players. So really looking forward to seeing, some of these single digits and seeing how they react on the field. All right. Before we finish up here with this whole team season preview, I wanted to ask you, are there any players specifically that you have a soft spot for?
Obviously.
Here we go.
I just mentioned one of them on the defense, Kalechi. Always had a soft spot for Kalechi. I think he's got the coolest name, first of all. And again, last year he really wanted to be a single digit. Seemed very disappointed when he didn't get it. So it was good to see that he, instead of getting upset and having that, be something that he looked negatively on, He obviously did the work that he needed to do on his leadership skills, over the fall and the spring camp. And, good to see him achieve that goal that he wanted. On the offensive side, Brendan Brady is somebody that I really have a soft spot for. Coming back again for his super senior season after having said, he was done with football, being willing to come back when Coach Traylor, called on him because he needed that depth. You really want to see Brendan have a healthy season this year and be able to achieve what he's wanted to achieve, and certainly has been capable of, being a great running back, but injuries have just hindered him. So hope to see him have a healthy season this year.
For me, it's an offense. It's going to be Josh Cephas. There's been some really good stories about him just off the field. Went to the practice. He came over and said hi to our nephews, to myself, and to our friend Lopez. Incredibly courteous, and just overall there was just this happiness, and it looked like, obviously he enjoys playing football, but it seems like he just loves playing football at UTSA even more. So, I don't know. I mean, just hearing all these stories about him and just seeing him and his journey really throughout his football career, he always seems to be like the lesser known of the big three, like the lesser talked about one. So just like to see him have another great season, and to just kind of see him, really make some big plays, to make some big impacts on this team. On the defense, it's sort of a fun one. I have such a soft spot for Lamont McDougal. I think it's the goggles.
It's absolutely the goggles.
There have got to be some more shirts from him with just goggles. I know it might not look great on a shirt, but there's got to be just something that, someone just kind of creates. Because, man, from the time I saw, he's hard to miss out in the field because you see those goggles. So, he just seems like a fun guy to be around, a guy that clearly is talented, and, much like you and Kalechi, there's just something about him that's just fun. I love saying the name Lamont McDougal. It just sounds to me like a football player. So I just hope he has another big season. I think he's going to do well, but, I want to make sure he's healthy and, I can cheer him on for the whole season.
All right, back in the spring, we talked about our way too early predictions. I feel like at that time we were a little more pessimistic in terms of, what we thought might happen for UTSA, only because we hadn't really seen some of the transfers that were coming in, and weren't really sure about some of these other position groups. Vegas has the line right now at 8.5 wins. Are you going with the over or the under?
I'm going over.
I think I'm going to go over too.
Wow.
All right, so let's talk about it game by game.
Okay, let's start out with first game, Houston in the Dome. My gut right now, I've gone back and forth, but I think we catch Houston at the right time. I'm talking upset in the Dome right away. Houston goes down, UTSA wins.
Yeah, I've gone back and forth, and we'll get into the other games, but I think we're going to have an upset in the first 3 games. Right now, I'm leaning towards Houston. Again, I think there's a lot of pressure on Houston going into this game. They're really picked to be the top G5 program, and so they have a lot of question marks just like we do. I think we catch them at the right time. This could be a win, especially if the Alamo Dome is packed. We're going to follow that up with Army. This game scares me, only because we have seen 2 quarterbacks in the last 2 times we've played Army get injured. So it gives me pause. I really would love to see a win, but frankly, I just want to see a healthy quarterback come out of this game. I think with the triple option, it's just such a different style. It's a tough game. I'm picking a loss. I want it to be a win because I'm going to be there in person, but picking a loss. What about you?
So I'll be there too. I know you said you'll
Are you
be
coming
there.
with me?
Yes. First time we played Army, like you said, we lost quarterback, but it was we lost by 18. Second game, we lost by 12. I think it's another close loss. I think with the cut blocking techniques that their offense has, we got to watch out for our defensive line depth. That's what I'm worried about there. So I'm picking a loss, unfortunately, but Let's cross our fingers. Maybe we'll be wrong. Hopefully we'll be wrong, right?
Absolutely.
Let's move on to Austin, Texas versus UTSA. It's the mothership. Look, if there's any year that we can upset Texas, this is the season. I just think we're going to come up just a little bit short because I think Sark is going to have Texas sharper than they were last year. I think there's still a transition, but I'm going to go ahead and go loss here.
I agree with you. I think this is the year. If there was going to be an upset, it could happen this year. The only reason I'm not picking an upset is my concern about the Army game. Right. I'm concerned about injuries and health coming out of the Army game. That's the only reason I think we might come up short, and I picked a loss. But if we come out of that Army game healthy and UT comes out of the Alabama game demoralized, this could completely change. So stay tuned for the week preview, but right now I'm going to go with a loss. Moving on to Texas Southern, we are going to win that game. I know we joked about that earlier, but we're going to win. Enough said.
I want to see a Diego Teo pass in this game.
And
I think we will. And I think we'll also
100%.
see a Cam Peters experience in here. So
we will definitely see Cam Peters play.
So I'm going with the win, which takes us up to Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and the start of conference play. Middle Tennessee, they now have an air raid. They hired a new offensive coordinator. I think this is going to be a little bit tougher game. I mean,
you don't think the quarterback's going to quit in the middle of the game again?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
But it could get interesting, right? Who knows? I just think that right now UTSA is a little more talented, and I think that talent will shine, and that they're much more efficient. So a win in Murfreesboro. Yeah. But also, I'm tired of seeing Middle Tennessee. We played Middle Tennessee like over the last 3 years, like
well, hey, good
way
news.
Too many times.
We're leaving Conference USA, and they're not. So
Perfect.
there you go. I also picked a win for Middle Tennessee. We have played games against Middle Tennessee a little closer than I think we should have, but I still think, hands down, we'll win. Moving on to Western Kentucky. No Kitley, no Zappy, no problem. I've got to win.
I like how succinct you were there. We talked about like keeping it short, but wow, that was really short. I think Western Kentucky comes in. I think they're going to give different looks, but I think they're not as efficient as last season. So, chalk another win up. Which takes us over to FIU. This is not a very good program. They've got a much better coach in place.
Not worried about the short week. This is a Friday game.
Yeah. No, I think there are a lot of things to worry about. And during the preview, I think we'll hit on some of those things. But I still think that we come away. I think they show up in Florida. A win.
Yeah. New coach at FIU, but from all reports,
not much has changed, right?
the program was left in shambles. I think this is fine. We come away with a win. That takes us to North Texas at home. This is the revenge game. The fascinating thing about North Texas UTSA series, whoever's at home apparently is the victor. And I don't think this year is going to be any different. I haven't heard anything coming out of Denton preseason that makes me think this game's going to give us pause in the Alamo Dome with no rain.
Look, I think they show up. And I think going back to what you just said, it's a revenge game. But I like the dynamic of Traylor and Luttrell because it seems like there's something there.
Yeah. They
and I'll talk about it more in the preview, but there's like a chippiness there, and I think things get out of hand in UTSA's favor because we essentially try to run up the score after what happened last season. Now this takes us to Birmingham.
Ooh.
A big game here. UAB came in here last season. Now we're going there. I think Frank Harris has a big game, and I think that's what gets us a win in Birmingham. Put me down and chalk with the win.
Yeah, this one's a tough one. I had it, a huge question mark when Bill Clark was still there. I still have it as a loss because I feel like this is going to be a tough game for us, and so this is really the, spoiler alert, only conference game I see as a real threat. But that might change as we kind of see how UAB progresses under their new coach. But for now, I'm gonna put it at a loss, which leads us to the next game, La Tech. Now, this could be a trap game. And I say that only because if I'm wrong and we win at UAB and we kind of come into Louisiana Tech with riding high from our UAB win, we could underestimate Louisiana Tech. There is a talented team at Louisiana Tech that Sonny Cumbie is inheriting. So not sure how they're going to come across under new head coach and how they're going to adapt to the air raid. So it's a potential risk, but I still see this as a win.
UTSA has notoriously not shown up for certain games, and I think after the high of UAB, me picking this win, they go into Ruston for the last time, and they come out losers. I think.
So you're picking the trap game.
I'm picking that this is the trap game. I'm picking that this is that Sonny Cumbie. We come actually not in Ruston. I keep saying, why am I saying Ruston? They're coming to that dome, and they're going to pull off the upset because I think there's just too much high, and I think there's just some things that they'll be able to do. That takes us to Houston. We're going to check out Rice. We will be there apparently. I think. I don't
Allegedly.
know. If you take me with you. I don't even know that Mike Bloomgren's going to be the coach at this point. And I think that's weird to say because I wouldn't see why Rice would want to make a change right at that point. But that said, Rice always pulls off some big upset. And so be careful with this. But I think coming off the upset loss to La Tech, I think Rice unfortunately gets beaten into the ground.
I have this as a win. I don't think we're going to shut out Rice at home. But again, maybe we could. If Bloomgren gets fired mid-season, all bets are off. But I do feel strongly that this is going to be a win for UTSA. Going into our last home game at UTEP, I'm going with a win, which means we are going to beat the Texas Trio. So
if you guys didn't get that was her pounding
that is my Hail Mary shot for the season. We are going to beat the Texas Trio. This is our last opportunity, folks. It's going to happen. And we're going to seal it with a victory at home against UTEP.
Gavin Hardison is still the quarterback at UTEP. It's a win for UTSA. He's throwing 4 interceptions in this game. Which brings us to a 7-1 record in conference for both of us. That should qualify us for the conference championship game. Now, where it's at, we don't know, but we're in the conference championship game. Could be against UAB, could be against FAU. Some have predicted. I said FAU, not FIU. Relax, everybody. To me, it doesn't matter where it's at. UTSA takes home their second consecutive conference championship game, and Frank rides out
as a hero
in Conference USA.
I picked us to have a loss to UAB. I think there's always a letdown somewhere. We saw that last year. But I think we win. And whether it's UAB or FAU, outside chance of Charlotte, but...
Stop it.
Yeah.
Stop it with Charlotte.
La Tech, maybe? I don't know. But I feel like the greater odds are us playing UAB or us playing FAU. And I think we win. Bowl game? Do we get the bowl game this year? I don't know. I would love to say we do. Obviously, it's really hard to predict this far out, but my concern is always that the better that we perform in the Conference USA championship, or Conference USA play, the harder the opponent and the higher the risk that we lose. So I think, again, we might come off of that high of winning the championship, may not get the bowl victory, but still I'd be okay with that as long as we go somewhere fun and not what Brett McMurphy had us going back to Albuquerque. No offense to Albuquerque, but been there, done that. I'd like to go somewhere new. What about you?
I think our friends over at Alamo Dome Audible talked about this at the end of last season. I think so did we. The peak is going to be the conference championship game. After that, it's like that's not really, I think, one of the goals for the team. So we may see, I think, some similarities from last season where we had some guys sit out. I'm going to pick a loss because not only are we going to play a pretty good team, but also I think we're going to have some guys just sit out for whatever reasons. So that is how we see this season going. Obviously, everybody's got their opinions out there, so
Sure.
we'd love to hear anybody else's, especially if they differ on us.
And again, keep this in mind for the first 3 conference games, or for the first 3 out of conference games. If we lose all 3, do not panic, Roadrunner Nation. It's okay. If we win one of the 3, I think we should be excited. If we win 2 of the 3, we should start building the statue of Jeff Traylor on campus. Let's go.
We're going such different routes because you're like, build a statue if we win like 2 out of the 3, and then I'm all, but if we lose the first 4 with Texas Southern,
that is the
Fire
spectrum
Traylor,
right
right? Like, that's the epitome of fandom.
That is UTSA Twitterverse. We're either going extreme one direction or the other, but the goal for those first 3 games is stay healthy no matter what. Steal one, either Houston, Texas, Army, it doesn't matter. Steal at least one.
All right, before we wrap this up, I will give you my Hail Mary shot, and that's Traylon Smith. Yes, running back Traylon Smith hits 1,100 total yards of offense.
Before we go, in a sign that college football is back, there was a story on Twitter today of some East Texas espionage.
Ooh.
Apparently, Jacksonville State head coach Rich Rodriguez is accusing SFA personnel of filming his spring game and practices. So for all of you college football sickos out there, go check out that story. It's kind of interesting.
Oh, I love it. I love it. College football is back.
That's right. And a plug for my other alma mater, Tarleton State. Those of you that were Ty Nix fans, he's now the defensive coordinator at Tarleton State. Woo. So, yeah, interesting pickup there for Tarleton. We'll leave that alone.
I wish he did. But
And then last but not least, if you want to catch any more women's soccer action, they will be on ESPN Plus on Thursday. They're playing Texas A&M Commerce at 7 p.m. And then they'll be back at home at Park West on Sunday at noon and playing at Kansas State. Good opportunity for us to pick up a Big 12 victory this time. Kansas State was picked last, I believe, or second to last in the Big 12. So it'll be interesting to see how they do. Might get that upset.
Yeah, we'll do a preview of Houston next week, but we'll also update some more on soccer because we did go ahead and do some soccer season preview. We've been able to go watch some of these games, so I'm looking forward to kind of breaking down some of that as well.
Thanks for joining us on the Hail Mary podcast. I'm Atos.
And I'm the Toves.
We'll be back next week to preview the Houston game.
I mean the upset win over Houston.
That's right. All right, birds up.
Birds up.